So, first of all, I want to thank my video audience, not you guys, because you didn't wish me well last week, but everybody, I got a lot of love on the Facebooks and the emails and all that jazz. People concerned about my injury. I appreciate it very, very much. I'm feeling great, thank you. And if I get real up to the camera, you can probably see the scars going on, but my wife assures me that my rugged good looks remain, and in fact, scars are considered to be quite attractive to some ladies. But seriously, it was very nice. Like, there was a lot of outpouring, a lot of love, and it made me feel good. It did. That's number one. Number two, today's Lighthouse is going to be dedicated to a friend of mine, Dr. Brian Galbert, for his refuah shalema. He should have refuah shalema, b'karov, God willing. And I'm coming to you from Orlando, from the house of Rabbi and Mrs. Lipsker, and which was put together by Avi Bryan and Josh Winograd. So thank you to you guys. Major kudos in UCF, University of Central Florida. So shout out to the Golden Knights, is it? Is that what? Yeah, Golden Knights, even though obviously I'm all about the U, but we'll have to give you love because it is in fact due. And we have a major debt of Hakarat HaTov for them inviting us here and allowing us to partake of their space and their Wi-Fi. And hopefully afterwards, maybe even a little bit of dinner, who knows? Yeah, so there's that. The topic this week is Women of the Wall. What's everyone fighting about? So we are in the period of the 3 weeks right now, which is why I'm looking this scruffy. And it's important that we are sensitive about this discussion because it can get very, very emotionally charged. I love you too, Yoni. What's with the Mickey ears? It's emotionally charged, so we're going to try very, very hard to be sensitive to different people. And yeah, that's what we're going to do. So to begin, the Women of the Wall. For those of you who don't know, because like in case you're not following the news, the Women of the Wall are not a group of female fighters that protect Westeros from the undead. That's not those women. Rather they are a group of Jewish ladies who want to be able to pray at the Western Wall without being arrested or harassed, or yeah, things like that. Now, I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, well, why would women be arrested for trying to pray at the Western Wall? Obviously, it must be we're dealing with Jordanian police officers, right? That we're talking about when the old city was under Arab rule and they didn't allow Jews to pray there. That's what most people would think. But no, that's not actually why. We're talking about Israeli police. So Israeli police are arresting women for praying at the wall. That sounds a little strange. Are they streaking at the wall? No. Are they praying to Buddha at the wall and that's offending people? No. That's not what they're doing at all. What they're doing is they are praying at the Western Wall, at the Kotel, with talis and tefillin and a Torah, and apparently that is a terrible thing. That is a terrible thing. That is such a terrible thing in the minds of some people that it is reasonable to arrest them or spit at them or harass them or jeers and whistles and in general just make them feel very, very unwelcome. Yeah. So I would like to just deal with that a little bit and try to understand why that is. Now, usually if you ask people why anybody would do that, they'd say, well, it's the ultra-Orthodox, it's the Taliban, and they just hate women. The ultra-Orthodox don't hate women. That's not true. It's a lot more nuanced and a lot more subtle than that, and hopefully we'll get a little bit of an understanding. Before we get started, it's important to point out that the purpose here tonight is not to decide who's right and who's wrong, who's wins in this debate, in this fight. The issue is hopefully to try to understand where people are coming from. Let's understand the sides, because oftentimes people get into arguments and they're just talking past each other. I mean, anyone who lives in this political climate understands that. People are just, they're totally talking past each other, and anything that you say about the other side too. So let's try to get into them a little bit. So what is the story of the Women of the Wall, or WOW as they like to be called? What's the story of the Women of the Wall? Well, we mentioned before that the Kotel was under Jordanian rule up until 1967. 1967, and in 1967, the Six-Day War, the Israelis, with the grace of God, were able to reconquer, and take back the old city of Jerusalem. And for the first time, in a very, very long time, Jews had the ability to come and go as they pleased. And obviously, going to the Kotel was a major thing. So around 1988, there were Jewish feminists, Orthodox feminists primarily, who wanted to be able to pray at the wall. And if you've ever been to the Kotel, you will notice that there's a mechitza. There's this separation wall that goes right down the middle of the plaza. Actually, not the middle. Most of it is to the men. I don't know what the proportions are, but I would think probably maybe 70-30 or whatever it is, 80-20. I don't really know. And they have a women's section. The women pray over here on this side of the wall, and the men pray on that side of the wall, and that is why Israel's an apartheid state. Oh, sorry, wrong speech. My mistake. And the women, they do not wear generally a talis, which is the prayer shawl, and it's fill in those black box phylacteries that the men love wearing, and there are people who are jealous of it. No, just kidding. And they wanted to be able to do that as well, and also to read from the Torah. Now, this offended many, many people. And it resulted in fights, and it resulted in arrests, and as is usually the case, when people get arrested for doing nothing wrong, they sue. And women of the wall sued, and they started to win. And this became a huge fight that went all the way to the Israeli Supreme Court, and finally they came up with a compromise. Recently, like very, very recently, talking about decades of fighting and tremendous agmas nefesh and difficulties from all these people, and they finally came to a compromise, and the compromise was that this Kotel Plaza that is currently existing will remain with the Orthodox, and further down, if you're looking at the Temple Mount, if you're looking towards the Kotel, to the right there's an area called Robinson's Arch. Robinson's Arch is named after the British archaeologist who's the one who discovered the arch, and there's a very, very large space over there, and they said that space will be given over to the women of the wall, and the Reform movement, and the Conservative movement, and the Masorti movement, and all the various egalitarian services will take place over there. And it seemed like a really good idea at the time, because if they don't have to see each other, then they won't fight. It's sort of like kids. You know, can you imagine you have these twins, and they're 4 years old, and they're fighting all the time, and it's my toy, and it's my toy, and it's I want it, and he hurt me, and all this bickering. What do? Okay. You go in this side of the room, and you go in this side of the room, and then Shalom Al Yisrael, everybody's going to be fine. And the Israeli government finally came up with this fantastic idea. Whoever thought? You go here, you go there. Great! Marvelous! Now, turns out much of the Women of the Wall movement was very excited. It was like a celebration, right? Because we finally got what we wanted. But not all. In fact, there was a large contingent of the Women of the Wall who were very unhappy, and in fact very angry at this idea. More on that soon. We'll try to understand why it is that they would be upset about that. But the most important part we come to now is the Israeli government has recently reneged on the deal. Like any good government in a campaign promise, they reneged on the deal, and they said they caved, they buckled to pressure from the ultra-Orthodox parties, not exclusively the ultra-Orthodox parties. It's important to point that out. There are many members of parliament, Chavrei Knesset, who were against this deal, who are not at all in any way, shape, or form ultra-Orthodox, but mostly the Shas party and others, and they just took it back. Now, I know what you're thinking, because you guys are good American kids. You're thinking, who cares? I don't care. But it's important. In the immortal words of Joe Biden, it's a big expletive deal. It's a big deal, and I'll tell you why it's a big deal. First of all, you have members of the United States Congress who are getting involved in this. You have the New York Times, the BBC, and all sorts of gigantic Jew-loving media outlets world-round talking about this. And in fact, there are internal calls in the Reform movement from Zionist organizations to boycott Israel. I read a very, very long op-ed about a week and a half ago by a hugely successful American Reform Jewish leader who was calling for secular Jews in the United States of America to not give any money to any Israeli causes, and then exert pressure on them that way. So this is a big deal. It's a big deal. And frankly, what's all the hoopla about? It just doesn't seem like people should be fighting over things that are this trivial. So I would like to begin in answering this by reading to you from the website of the Women of the Wall. Again, don't take my word for it. You're more than welcome to go Google it on your own. They have this beautiful website. What is the Kotel and why does it matter? I am reading for you now. This is a direct quote. This is verbatim. The Kotel is the only remaining wall left of the Second Temple, the place where our ancestors went to seek God. We aspire to do the same, with prayer, reverence, and joy. Freedom to worship at the Kotel is one of the most important outcomes of the Jewish people's return to Jerusalem in 1967. But this great achievement is tainted by the fact that women are prohibited from praying freely at the holy site. The Kotel is a central symbol of Jewish unity to Jews around the world. If, as tradition tells us, the temple was destroyed because of sinat chinam, baseless hatred, we dare to assert that allowing our voices to be heard would be no less than a tikkun, a mending of the history of intolerance. Okay, so there are a few pieces of this that I want to delve a little bit more deeply into. It's very apropos that we're having the discussion right now because they're talking about why the Second Temple was destroyed. The Second Temple was destroyed on Tisha B'Av, on the 9th of Av. We are in that period of time right now. We are in the 3 weeks of mourning, which is, again, why we're scruffy. And we're taught it's because of baseless hatred. So they are invoking that and saying that it would be baseless hatred to not allow women to pray freely at the wall, which is a little bit ironic, by the way, because I'm not sure that the rabbis whom they are quoting, who said that the temple was destroyed because of baseless hatred, would necessarily have agreed to allow them to pray the way that they want to pray either. Just, again, if we're going to take things at face value, it's important to be intellectually honest and point that out. But certainly you can feel the pain of these people, right? These are well-meaning people who want to worship the same way you or I do, and they're being withheld from doing so. So, the Kotel, as they say, is the only remaining wall left of the Second Temple. I think we should take this opportunity to dispel a massive myth. I don't know why I was taught this. I know that my parents paid a lot of money for my tuition as a kid. I know that, and I know that your parents did. And I was taught this, right? We all learned this when we were children. There's a beautiful song from the diaspora, right? Though she's all that does remain. It's a beautiful song, and we were taught. I was taught. I testify to this today to all of you. I was taught that the reason that the Western Wall remains is because when the Jews were building the temple, the rich Jews paid slaves to build the temple. But the poor Jews, they didn't have money to pay slaves. So they built it with their own hands. They went and with their own hands and the sweat of their brow, they built this wall, and therefore, that is the only thing that remains of the temple. This is a crock. It's ridiculous. I mean, nothing could be. By the way, the reason that it offends me a little bit is because like a simple Google search would show you for this to be false. Let's take therefore just 2 minutes and understand the topography. So, contrary to what the PLO would have you believe, there were 2 temples that stood where there is now a golden dome. Now, there is a mountain there. It's called Mount Moriah. And on this mountain was a temple. This first one is destroyed by the Babylonians. Later on, there's a second one, which is destroyed ultimately by the Romans. Now, there was a very great builder by the name of Herod, who was king of the Jews. And Herod said, that's a really puny temple. By the way, you probably heard of Herod because the Caesarea, Masada is Herod's summer palace, which is really fantastic. And he built Caesarea. And there was a Rabbi at Torah that used to say that if the 7 wonders of the world would have been published a little bit later, Herod would have had at least 2 of them. And it could be true because the Lighthouse in Alexandria really paled by comparison. Anyway, so Herod says, this puny temple, I mean, this temple doesn't need a fancier temple. The thing is, you can't build a floating temple because they didn't have technology for that. So if this is your mountain and your temple occupies all the space on the mountain, how do you make a temple bigger? The answer is simple. I'll put a platform there. So I'll put a platform like this, and now I can make a temple that occupies all of this space. The only problem being temples don't float and neither do platforms. In fact, it is still to this day the world's largest freestanding platform, if I'm not mistaken, 2,000 years later. So how do you make a platform stand up? The answer is retaining walls, ladies and gentlemen, retaining walls. So if this is your platform, you have a western wall holding up this side, a southern wall, and an eastern wall. Why do you have no northern wall? Because the northern wall is the mountain, right? It was already there. You did not need a northern wall. Therefore, and there's a very complex arch system on the inside. You're not allowed to go there. The Waqf will not allow you to. That's what's holding up the temple, the platform to this day. What remains from the temple? I'll give you a hint. Nothing. Nothing remains from the temple. Temple, Atlantis. Nothing. Okay? What does remain is a platform. One of the walls is the Western Wall. So, is the Western Wall holier than, say, the Southern Wall? No. Is it holier than the Eastern Wall? No. It's not. I have a better question for you. Is the Western Wall holy? No. No. There are places on the Temple Mount which are holy, and on those places you cannot go. The Western Wall is every bit as holy as the stones on the floor that you stand on when you are there. It is a holy place. The Western Wall itself is not holy. I'm sorry to burst bubbles left and right, but it's just not true. We could talk about sticking notes in it some other time. That's a different time for a different sphere when perhaps we'll talk about magic and superstition. But in any event, so why then, pray tell, why then would anybody see a benefit in praying at the Western Wall over here? The answer is tradition. Tradition, ironically. Ironically, right? Now, why tradition? Because our forefathers davened there. Why did our forefathers daven there? Because that's where a space was. There was a space there where you could go. So that's where they went when they were allowed to. As we mentioned before, many times in history they were not allowed to, depending upon which benevolent overlord we were under at the time, right? So that's where they went. But if you go now to the Kotel tunnels and you have that long, it stretches way down. Isn't it because it's closer to where the thank you, hello, Miss Roberts, how are you? Closer to where the Holy of Holies was believed to be. We know where the Holy of Holies was. I don't know why that would make it holier. In fact, when there excuse me, when there was a temple, the Jews prayed quite a bit away from the Holy of Holies. They were far to the south. So yeah, I've heard people say that, but I don't know. I mean, it's not really all that compelling to me. But you know, it's a thing. So, yeah. Now, that's number one. So why is it? We mentioned that when they had this compromise, which I believe was put in by Natan Sharansky. I think Sharansky was the one who came up with it. When they came up with this compromise, many of the people in the Women of the Wall were excited, exuberant, ceremonies left and right, and many of them were very, very upset. Why? Why were they upset? Well, first of all, what would be... You can't have a good Jewish unity movement without a breakaway, right? Obviously, we need a breakaway. But why? Why were they upset? You know how they say, it was Reagan, I think, right? It's the economy, stupid, right? Okay. It's recognition, stupid. It's not about praying. It was never about praying. It's about recognition. You see, the components of the Women of the Wall who were egalitarian, who were reform and conservative, who want a space where they can pray without a mechitza at all, the fact that the Israeli government is going to give them a space is stupendous. It's colossal. It's a huge give. It's a huge win. It's a massive win for them, right? Wow, the Israeli government has recognized us as a reasonable movement and a justified movement, and we're legit. But you see, the Women of the Wall, the original Women of the Wall, many of whom were Orthodox, they don't want to pray there. They're not egalitarian. I'm sorry, that just tickles me. They want to pray in the Orthodox section with tefillin and talis and Torah. So giving them a section with the Reform movement and the conservative movement without a mechitza does not help them. So the movement splintered. So what you have now is WOW, the Women of the Wall, and OW, original Women of the Wall. I didn't come up with these acronyms. That's theirs. I think they're actually kind of catchy. I like them. So that's what it's about. That's what it's about. They're not getting that recognition. Now let's think for a moment. As we said, the government reneged on it anyway. So now you have all these reforming, conservative, and humanitarian Jews who are up in arms and very, very upset. Very, very upset. Why are you not recognizing me? Well, I think, I'm a good American boy, and I'm sitting here in Florida thinking to myself, why don't we recognize them? Why do they have to be, oh, so religious all the time? Why? Why is that? Well, who gets to determine who's recognized and based upon what? Interesting question. I think if we're going to ask why they're not being recognized, the first question has to be, well, who does the recognition and what is the metric of recognition? So one of the things that I hear very, very often is the Jewish concept of elu ve'elu, which means these and these. We see this in the Talmud all the time. These and these are both the words of the living God. So you can have arguments between Shammai and Hillel, between Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Yishmael. You can have differences in Ashkenazi and Sephardi. You can have Hasidim and Misnagdim. You can have Yemenite Jews and Egyptian Jews and Syrian Jews and Elu. They're all Jews. They're all good. They're all kosher. So why all of a sudden are you saying that the Reform movement is not kosher? That seems to fly in the face of Elu ve'elu. And that's a very, very good point. That's a very, very good point. So I, the Reformed Jew, come to you, the Orthodox Jew, you, Avi, will take it for a moment, and I say, why do you not accept me? You do what you do, I do what I do. Elu ve'elu. It's a very, very good point. In order to understand this, we have to take literally 90 seconds and think about what that means. When we say that two opposing views can both be kosher or correct, we believe that in every system. We have that in the American system. The Supreme Court of the United States of America can have a 5-4 decision. Does that mean that the 4 were wrong or illegal in some way? Or does that mean that you can have many different legal opinions which are all valid, right? You're pre-law, aren't you? Can you have may you have more than one legally valid opinion? Yeah. Isn't that cool? That's totally legit. That makes sense. So we have that in the Jewish... we have that in Judaism also. We have that in the Jewish. We have that in Judaism also. We can also have that. But tell me something. What would be the limitations of that in the American legal system? What if, for instance, you have one person that says, well, this is what the Constitution says, and the other person says, but I don't like the Constitution. Are they both legally valid? Not so much. So when you talk about two things, two different interpretations, being correct, they have to have one thing in common. They have to be playing by the same rules. As long as you're playing by the same rules and the board is the same, so to speak, then sure, there can be many different types of Jews, many different ways of worship. No one debates that. The ultra-Orthodox are not debating that. They agree with that. They agree with that. Where they disagree is they say, we're not both accepting the Constitution, and you prefer Hamilton's way and I prefer Jefferson's way. I'm saying Constitution and you're saying Sharia. That's the difference. So let's bring this down. What does that look like on a practical level? Very simple. You see, all of the Jewish groups that we named before, whether you're Ashkenazi, hey guys, whether you're Ashkenazi or Sephardi or Hasidish or Misnagdish or Egyptian or Syrian or Lebanese or Moroccan descent, what all of them have in common is halacha. They all agree to abide by Jewish law. Well, the conservative and reform movements, at least according to the Orthodox, and mostly according to themselves as well, do not. They are not halachic movements. They are extra halachic movements. When I say extra, I don't mean more halachic. I mean outside of halachic. More like extramarital. So, if that is the case, if that's the case, then when you say that elu ve'elu, well, how are we basing this? How are we basing this? Now that doesn't mean that it has to be, maybe halacha doesn't have to be the metric, right? Who says halacha is the metric? Maybe the measuring stick should be, are you Jewish? Maybe we should say, if you're Jewish, you have a right to pray however you want, right? That would be a very reasonable thing to say, wouldn't it? I think that's reasonable. Personally, I think it's very reasonable. However, you understand that you can't exclude, Jews for Jesus. Right? Again, just the very, very same idea, very simple. If your metric is, as long as you're Jewish, you deserve your own space to pray, then you also have to allow Jews for Jesus. You must. I also think that you should allow vegan Jews to go and have a carrot service. I mean, the point is you cannot withhold anything from anybody if your metric is Jewish. Everyone who's Jewish gets their own place to pray, and you have to be okay with that. Which, again, is fine. Just be consistent. Make sure you're very consistent. So if your point is, I deserve to be here because I'm Jewish, so does he, and so does she. And the answer cannot be, oh, Sprung, give me a break, but they're not asking. When's the last time that the Jews for Jesus were asking for their own place? Okay, so I'm a Jew for Jesus and I'm asking. Can we have the discussion now? Right? The fact that nobody's coming up with this is not an argument. It's not an argument. In fact, it's such a terrible argument that guess who's using that argument now? Many ultra-Orthodox are using that argument to attack women of the wall, saying, where were you until 1988? Where were you is not an argument. I'm here now. I don't care where I was. What does that do with anything? I'm less right because I didn't come sooner. That's because I was on vacation in Orlando. That's why I wasn't here then. I'm here now. It's such a silly... Well, there aren't a lot of them. There aren't a lot of them. You know what there aren't a lot of? Jews. There's not so many of you that you don't get a... Come on. It's just silly. It's very, very silly. That's very silly. Incidentally, if you're going to argue that the Israeli government should allow absolutely anybody because of the separation of church and state, first of all, there is no separation of church and state in Israel. Second of all, you're also going to have to allow the Catholics and the Buddhists and the Zoroastrians and the cult of Zeus, right? So you just be consistent in your reasoning. Okay? Be very consistent in your reasoning. And I'm not saying, again, like I mentioned before, I'm not saying that the line that you draw has to be halacha. I'm not saying that. I don't care what the line is, personally. I think you need to be consistent about it, and that's the main thing. We have to sit down and actually have the real discussion with ourselves first, and then with each other, with respect. Say, okay, how are we breaking this down, and why? What makes a movement legitimate? What doesn't? Is it numbers? Is it popularity? Is it fashion sense? Is it theology? What? Tell me what? What is it? That discussion has to be had. And it's funny because that's the discussion that's never had. No one ever mentions that. No one touches that one with a 10-foot pole. Everybody talks about social justice. Social justice meaning I can do what I want. I'm not impressed by that. Let's have a real mature discussion about ideas. And as long as we can do that, then you know, we're going to be fine. But again, just to sum up, if you want to know why it is that some people would say, no, that's excluded, and you say, but Elu ve'elu, we're all the same, the answer is, how are we the same? Where do you draw that line, and how do you draw that line? I'm not concluding with any one way. I'm concluding with the question. You have to ask yourself the question. Now, I'd like to ask another question. Why do the ultra-Orthodox care so much if women read from Torahs? I mean, like, seriously, you're not going to hurt anybody. It's a scroll. Why do they care? Why is this such a big deal? They care. Very, very, very weird. Furthermore, is it not true that do the Orthodox not want to pray with the Reform and Conservative? That's also inaccurate, right? Meaning there's no one in the world who would not allow a secular Jew to go into the most Hasidic shul in the world and participate in the prayers. That's never been the issue either, right? That isn't the issue. The issue is to have a different type of prayer in a different place. Well, why? Why is that an issue? So here we're going to get a little bit more nuanced, and we're going to deal with very, very apropos, first things first, mechitza. What is a mechitza, you ask? A mechitza is the massive wall with the barbed wire and the armed guards in the middle of the shul that separates the men from the women. That is a mechitza. Now, I say it's apropos because the origin of mechitza happened where? At this very place! The Talmud in Tractate Sukkah says that the rabbis, you're talking Second Temple periods, you're over 2,000 years ago, the rabbis noticed that when people would come to the temple, you had guys in the temple, and you had gals in the temple. And sometimes, all the time, when you have guys and gals together, you get a party, which is great. Jews love parties, but it's not necessarily conducive to a prayer environment or a temple environment. The way that the Talmud puts it is kalas rosh, lightheadedness. You know, witty banter, flirtation, things that are lovely and fantastic at the kiddush in shul, but not at the prayers in shul. So, the first point that we should make here, people often like to use the term egalitarianism. Egalitarian means equal. We don't like the idea that the Orthodox separate the men and the women because it means that they're not equal. That's not true. I shouldn't say it's not true. It's inaccurate. It's very misleading. The reason why the Orthodox sit separately is not because they don't like their wives, and it's not because they think their daughters are worth less than their sons. They do it because if you've ever sat in shul next to your wife, you know why they did it. You know why, right? Because you're sitting there in shul and you're like, right? That's why. So it's not that men and women have to be separate for all things. They don't. They don't. And in fact, there are many Orthodox functions nowadays which have nothing to do with prayer, where they separate males and females. That's fine. They can do that. You can have separate seating for a football game if you want, but that's not the halacha. It's not the law. There's no law to separate males and females at a kiddush. There's no law to separate males and females at a wedding. There's no law to separate males and females at your Shabbos table. There are people that do it, and that's cool, man. You can do it based upon hair color. You could do it based upon height. You could do it based upon what you like to eat. But it's not you're not doing it based upon halacha. Halacha says, oh, we're praying now. This is a place of prayer. So we're going to separate males and females. And again, it's important to point out what it's about and what it's not about. So mechitza, the concept of mechitza, which means to separate, the concept of mechitza happened in this very place, on this very plaza, thousands of years ago. So the first thing is that we don't pray together for that reason. That's where that comes from. Now, let's talk about women wearing tefillin and women wearing a talis. Halachically, there's nothing wrong with that at all. In fact, I think you'd be very, very hard-pressed to find anyone semi-intelligent who would tell you that it's a problem halachically. Because it's not. Rashi's daughters wore tefillin. Michal, daughter of Shaul, wore tefillin. There is, however, a machlokes. There is a machlokes. Get this. If a woman wears tefillin, whether or not she makes a bracha. That is an argument. That's a machloket, okay? So the halacha actually has an argument as to whether or not women would make a blessing if they wear tefillin. There is, however, absolutely no halachic problem with a woman wearing tefillin. That's just not true. It would be the same thing as a woman sitting in a sukkah, because or waving a lulav. There is a mitzvah, which is a time-bound positive commandment, and women are not obligated to do those things. The fact that they're not obligated to do those things does not mean that they mustn't or cannot. It merely means they are not obligated to. So why, pray tell, does it offend some people so viscerally when they do that? And this goes back to a word that we've said a few times already today: tradition. Tradition. Women traditionally do not wear tefillin. And now all of a sudden, you're wearing tefillin. And that's a deviation from tradition. Jews get very jittery when you deviate from tradition, right? Watch the movie and listen to the song. It was a horse and a mule. They don't like that. It gets them very scared. Furthermore, people question motives. People question motives. Now, I don't like dealing in motives because I'm not a psychic, and I don't know your motives, and I don't think he knows your motives, and I don't think everyone who claims to know people's motives knows the motives, and even if they are right about some people's motives, they won't be right about everybody's motives. But if we're on the truth tree, and we're being honest with each other, then it's a fact. That makes people very scared, makes them very, very nervous. They don't like it. It's not traditionally done. Now, traditions in Judaism oftentimes have the force of law. For example, yarmulkes, that's a tradition. Kitnio, not eating legumes on Passover, that's a tradition. Doing hakafot and arava and sukkot, that's a tradition. There are many Jewish traditions which have the force of law. This is not one of them. But it does put people off very, very much. Whoa, but Sprung, women can't read from the Torah because everybody knows that women menstruate and then they're impure and then they can't read from the Torah. Erroneous! Erroneous! False. It's not true. It's just not true. The Gemara says very black and white explicitly, the Torah is not Mekabel Tuma. It's not a problem. It's not a problem. So what we're really dealing with is a hashkafik issue. We're dealing with a philosophical issue. We're dealing with a motivation issue. We're dealing with a motivation issue. That's what it is. Now, whether or not you can have all women's prayer groups, because as we said before, halachically, you can't have the women and the men together. That's been established. But what about an all-women's prayer, which is what they're doing? The question of all women's prayer groups is being hotly debated in the Orthodox community and has been for a long time. It has been for a long time now. I think probably better part of 40 years at least. Most of the halachic authorities, if not all of the major halachic authorities, say no. And there are some people, debatably whether or not they are halachic authorities, who say yes. I have no horse in that race. Okay? Again, that's not the purpose here is not to solve the world's problems and say they're right and they're wrong. The issue here is to understand. So if all of the major halachic decisors, for whatever reason, the good, the bad, the ugly, for whatever reason, if they're against it, then many people are going to support that and be against it. Okay, I understand where they're coming from, but you also understand the other side, right? You understand the person who wants it, the person who wants to do this. So let's talk a little bit about sensitivity training. You know, I've been reading these vitriolic articles on both sides, like incredible on both sides. The people on the right and the left, and it was just that. I'm not going to tell you who wrote this because I think it's not nice to say who wrote it. And I would like to read this for you. He writes as follows. Many American Jews are also unaware that there already exists a facility at the Western Wall for mixed prayer, and that the claim of American liberal leaders that they cannot pray as they wish at the site is entirely false. Several years ago, then Religious Affairs Minister Naftali Bennett responded to persistent agitation from the women of the Wall and American liberal leaders by building an alternative facility he called Ezrat Yisrael. Women of the Wall responded with a 24-hour sit-in and steadfastly refused to move its monthly services to the site, although members could pray there undisturbed as they claimed to desire. Well, that happens to be true. And incredibly misleading. Incredibly misleading. You know why they didn't like it? Because it's a tiny, unfancy place. They didn't like it. They weren't consulted. Naftali Bennett went literally in the middle of the night. I kid you not. He went in the middle of the night. He built it on his own. And they don't like it. Now, is that a reason not to go there? I don't know. Decide for yourself. But by saying, well, they're just complaining for no reason. No, they're not complaining for no reason. Under the compromise, they had this beautiful site, and they didn't get that. They didn't get that. By the way, if you've ever been to the Kotel, you'll see that the regular plaza isn't the most beautiful thing either. But anyway, so, okay. Now, I continue. The truth is, no one uses the site except on an occasional basis. Neither American liberal movements have ever once filled the site to capacity, yet they demand a new, larger facility as if there were a real need. So, the author of this is saying that there is no real need because they don't fill it up. Well, if you build it, they will come. Right? That would be an argument on the other side. Maybe if they had a nice, fancy place, they would go there. I don't know. But it's certainly not a compelling point. Maybe they want a nice space. Why shouldn't they have a nice space? And again, it's about the recognition anyway, right? I mean, who are we fooling? Now, liberal leaders misportray the interests of their American congregants. Jewish tourists do not come to the Western Wall looking for the same prayers they rarely attend at home. On the contrary, like visitors to the holy sites of religions all around the world, they come to see and perhaps join natives at their native prayer. Says you. I'm sure many people probably would be interested if there was an alternative. You know how I know? Because a lot of them are saying that they're interested. No, they're lying. Why do you think they're lying? Maybe they're telling the truth. That they're interested. They're paying thousands of dollars. Thousands of hard-earned dollars to go to Israel. Because they care about Israel. And they're going to the Kotel to pray because they care about the Kotel and they care about prayer. Who are you to say that they don't? It just strikes me as so hollow. And now the end is the best. Today, only 25% of American Jews are members of a Reform or conservative congregation. Over 60% of American Jews are totally unaffiliated and have little or no interest in Judaism, Israel, Jerusalem, or the Western Wall. The liberal movements are losing their grandchildren to assimilation. They would do far greater good were they to apply their passion towards ensuring future Jewish generations rather than upsetting traditions of prayer at Israel's Western Wall. First of all, I find that to be very mean. Second of all, it's a red herring. 25% of American Jews are still much larger than all of the Orthodox Jews. So I don't know how that's a point. Like the fact that you think they're not doing something right, therefore they don't get a place to pray. So what have we not actually dealt with in this article? We haven't dealt with the issue of whether or not they deserve a place to pray. Everyone's completely forgetting and ignoring the actual issue. What are they talking about? They're talking about the things that they don't want to talk about. Now, by the way, the other side, as we said, is just as mean-spirited. Because I watched this lovely video today, which a very good friend of mine, I love her to bits, sent me, that the Women of the Wall put out. And basically, it is showing in a very, very comical way how the reason that the Orthodox don't want the Women of the Wall or the other people there is because they're against social justice. They don't like women. Really? Really? I mean, does anybody believe that? Does anybody, have you met an Orthodox person? Like, this is not to say that there aren't Orthodox women who want to take a more active role in synagogal life. There are many who do. There are many who do. And there's this issue of balance right now. Again, within the Orthodox community, there's an issue of balance. There are many Orthodox women who want to take a more active role. And there's some push right now, and it'll be interesting to see how it comes out, how it plays out. But I would like to tell you all something, and I mean this from the bottom of my heart. My wife, and my mother, and my bubby, and my daughter are no less important than any man. They aren't, and that's foolish. And believe me, if you would have told my grandmother, my bubby, Aleh Hashem of blessed memory, Chana Weinberg, if you would have gone to her and told her that in Orthodox Judaism, women are pushed down, she would have either laughed at you or punched you in the face. I don't know which. It's ridiculous. How could you say that women are pushed down? It's not true. That's not true. So again, the real issue is not social justice. It's not male-female. It's very simply, what should we decide is legitimate and not? And just because you want to do something doesn't make it legitimate. Otherwise, where do you draw that line? Where do you draw it? You have to let in the Jew for Jay. You have to. It's only fair. It's only fair. Now, tell me something. I see this footage, and it hurts, man. It hurts in the heart. You see this footage of women holding Torahs, and they're fighting with the police over a Torah scroll. It's like, it's terrible. It's terrible. It's the saddest thing you'll ever see. Jewish women fighting with Jewish soldiers over a Torah scroll. How can that even happen, right? It's inconceivable how that can happen. Okay, that's true. That's true. It's a really good point. They're there to read from the Torah. Great. Now let's take the other side for a moment. If you believe that according to your religion, she is not supposed to do that, then to you, it's someone taking a Torah scroll in an unkosher way. How would you feel if, if a group of Babylonians who worship the sun god were to bring a Torah scroll into a shul and dance with it? They have great intentions. And no, I'm not equivocating, okay? How would you feel? You'd be very upset. Meaning the fact that you happen to be Jewish, and the fact that you have the greatest intentions in the world, and the fact that you're going there to pray to the same God, does not mean that you're not grievously offending the other guy. Let's be honest about it. It's just a fact. It's a fact. So, in summation, if you see people to the right of you or the left of you, if you see people arguing against it, against the Women of the Wall, Don't do yourself and them the disservice of thinking that they're just archaic cavemen and they're the Taliban and they want everyone to be exactly like them and they hate you. It's not true. That's not true. The same way that you believe firmly in your religion and it's important to you and it's meaningful to you, it's also important and meaningful to them. And in fact, you can make a very, very strong case. You can make a very strong case that it's more than equally important to them. Because they're there every day, man. They're not there once a month. They're not there every once in a while. They're there every day. It's very, very meaningful to them. It's a very important thing to them. You know, let's get real. It's the truth. And on the flip side, if you're standing on that side of the mechitza, and you see women coming with Torah scrolls and a talis and tefillin, and your mind immediately tells you, they're here to destroy Judaism, they're here because they want to force me to let gender-neutral bathrooms, and they're going to... No, they're not! No, they're here to pray! They're here to pray. And I think that if more of both of these people could sit in a room across a table from each other, instead of like these politicians, because politicians don't care. Why did they renege on the promise? Right? It's great. Why did a politician renege on a promise? It's the most ridiculous question I've ever heard in my life. When does a good politician ever keep a promise? They cave to the pressure, 100%. You don't want politicians to serve. Let the Jews talk to each other. I'm sure we can get a solution if we talk and understand what the real issues are. Where do you draw the line? Who says and why? And again, before you talk about it with somebody else, make sure that you understand in your own mind, at least have an idea in your own mind how you would parse these things. And I think if we do that, we will be a lot closer to solving the sinat chinam, the baseless hatred problem, than we are now. Just talk, listen, try to understand, and be intellectually honest with your own position. If you get like overly solidified in your own position, like I'm right, well then I don't want to talk to you. I got nothing to say to you, buddy. Anyway, to conclude, the women of the wall thing is real, and it's very painful to many, many people on both sides, and it's not an elementary issue, and anybody who thinks that it is, anybody who thinks that you can solve it with a stroke of a pen, and that it's just they're being myopic and they're being irreligious, and you're wrong. You're wrong, and you're doing the nation a grave disservice in your wrongness. And that's all, and hopefully we should, hopefully God willing, people will love each other a little bit more. Peace and love.